When I first started out with the OMS diet, I found that I turned to soups quite often early on. And the reason I did that is I found that they were simple to make, but you could make a relatively big batch, carry it on throughout the week, add to it as necessary, and in many cases you can even freeze it for later on. So soups, I think, are really an important recipe or important part of the repertoire of the OMS diet. The one that I turned to the most early on was what's called the Ribolita. And the Ribollita comes from Tuscany in Italy. It just simply means reboiled. It's in essence a bean and vegetable soup, very similar really to a minestrone, but I like the fact that it had a rich array of carbohydrates from the beans, protein, also from the beans, from potatoes. It has a lot of green vegetables, flavored with some tomatoes. And once you make it, you can carry on throughout the week, which is what I often do, and just keep adding ingredients to it. In essence, it's a soup that has a life that takes me through the whole week. So today, I just want to show the basic preparation. This is the classic preparation I learned while I was in Tuscany. And it's really simple. We're going to make the entire soup completely without oil, so it's just all natural ingredients. We're going to use some kale, and this is what I refer to as Tuscan kale. Many times it's referred to as dinosaur kale or cavolo nero, which is the Italian name. You can use curly kale if you don't have access to this. We have some beans that are already cooked. These are just borlotti beans. You can use any kind of bean really, but just make sure they're cooked ahead of time. We took about half the quantity of the beans and pureed it. And that will be important later on to give the soup a little bit of body. The potatoes we chose here are just cut up, and these are potatoes that are waxy. That means when you cook them, they're going to hold their shape. They're not going to break down. So look for some kind of potato that's like that. We have some cooked spinach, a little bit of cabbage, Savoy cabbage, which we just dropped into some boiling salted water, just maybe for about a minute or two, just to set the color nicely. And that's going to go in a little bit later on the soup. We have a little bit of tomato. Not a lot. The soup doesn't require a lot, just a little bit to give the soup a little bit of body and acidity. And then at the end, we have some dark rye bread that's been chopped up. You can use any kind of bread that you have on hand, maybe if it's gone a little bit stale. Just chop it up fine. It doesn't have to be real big. It will swell when it's in the soup, but that gives the thickening. And what we're going to do to get started with the base here is we just have a little bit of onion, we have some garlic, we have some celery and some carrot, which I'm going to cut up. Now with the garlic, you're going to want to keep the garlic cloves whole. Just make sure they're peeled. I found during my time of cooking in Italy, the Italian people really don't like a strong garlic flavor in any of the preparations they have, despite what many people think. And oftentimes it's just a whole clove of garlic going in just to give it a little bit of perfume. And after an hour or so of cooking, these will get really soft and they're quite delicious actually. So with the onion, I'm just going to go ahead and chop this up. I'm just going to run a knife through it from the side here. You can keep the dice relatively big. I always like to think on this particular soup, anything that fits nicely on a spoon is about the size that you're looking for. So we're just going to cut these up. And now with the celery, we just cleaned our celery here. Again, we're just thinking the same thing. Try to keep in mind what's in the soup or what's on the spoon. So if your celery is big, just go ahead and cut it in half lengthways, and then we're just going to make some nice slices. With the carrot, you can go ahead and cut the carrot the same way you cut the celery, or if you prefer, which is what I often do, I like giving things a little bit of a different shape. So I cut the carrot kind of in half here, lay it down like this, and then I alternate my cuts, and I just make like these little wedges, which I think is nice in the soup. It gives the soup a different look instead of just having everything be the same shape. I think this is kind of an interesting way to go. Right. I think that's about good enough there. Once you get all your vegetables prepared here, we're going to go ahead and get everything turned on. We'll make sure your pan is nice and warm. You're going to want to have a little bit of water on hand. Once the pan gets up to temperature, we're going to get all the vegetables in at once, but a little bit of water is helpful at this point to prevent any sticking or burning. So we'll get all our vegetables in there. You should hear a bit of a sizzle when they go in. When I'm cooking without oil, I think it's really important to make sure you get it a good stir really rapidly at first, and go ahead and get some salt into the mix right away. The salt will draw out some of the moisture in the vegetables, and that helps to prevent the sticking. So once you get all your vegetables in the pan cooking away, you can go ahead and slice up your kale. Now this is really simple. It does have a pretty thick little bit of a rib down here. I don't worry too much about it except for the very last bit. And so I just kind of hold everything together and then just slice away. Right, there we go. I think everything is prepared here. Now is the easy part. The soup really comes together rapidly once you have all the ingredients in place. And so we're just going to let these vegetables sweat away, but we're going to start flavoring them. So we're going to get our whole garlic cloves in there. Just drop them on in. And then we've got some herbs. Now this is just some rosemary, some thyme, and a little bay leaf. And I just sort of tie them together so that they're not going to go all over the place. I like to have a little bit of a tie thing here. And just tie it right to your handle. And that's just to help you fish it out a little bit later. Vegetables are looking pretty good right now. They've been going maybe, close to 10 minutes or so, and they've softened up a bit. You can look at the green on the celery has sort of turned opaque, and the carrots have taken on a nice orange color. If you just take one out and bite into it, it should still have a little bit of a bite in it, not completely soft, and that's your cue to start adding the rest of the vegetables. So we're going to, or a good amount of them. We're going to add the beans all at once. We're going to add the potatoes. The potatoes will take about 20 minutes to cook, so that's how long the soup's going to take from this point forward. And then we're going to go ahead and add our raw kale. Just pop it all in at once. Go ahead and drop some seasoning into here. Be careful with the salt. You can is often said, you can add more, but you can't take it away if you add too much. So just be a little bit careful with that. Okay, we've got everything kind of mixed together. It's just been cooking a couple of minutes. And now I think it's a good time to go ahead and add our broth in here. And just use a real good quality vegetable broth. I never like using the cubes, I would prefer using water instead of the cubes, which I think have too many chemicals, too much salt in them. It just affects the flavor a little bit too much for me. So we'll get that broth in there, and we're just going to bring everything up to a boil and let that simmer for about 5 or 10 minutes before we add the remaining parts of the soup. After the soup is cooked, maybe 10 minutes or so, 10-15 minutes, just long enough to bring it up to a boil and letting it simmer for a bit. That's the time that we're going to start adding some more ingredients. And so we've got our other bit of cabbage here, which is just Savoy cabbage that we blanched off. We're going to get all of that in here. Give it a little bit of a stir. The soup is going to start getting really thick at this point. We're going to thicken it even more, and this is the beans that we pureed. Half of the amount that we have, we just pureed them, and this is going to give the soup a lot of body. So we're just going to get that in here. Give it a good stir. Especially with the bean puree, it's really important to stir that, otherwise it's going to settle and burn on the bottom of the pot, and that's certainly not what we're looking for. So once that's all incorporated, we'll go ahead and give our tomatoes a splash in. When you do the tomatoes, just go ahead and puree them whole. Don't worry about the skins, don't worry about the seeds. Most of the nutrition in the tomatoes are in the skins and seeds anyway, and it really is not a big deal if there's a few seeds floating around in your soup. And then finally, we'll get our cooked spinach in here. The final part of finishing the soup is just simply adding the bread. Now the bread just needs to go in right at the last moment and just give it enough time to swell up a bit. So we're just going to pop our bread in, swirl it around. When you're ready to serve the soup, the only thing that you really want to try to check is maybe the potato bits. You know, just make sure they're cooked through. That's really the only thing you really need to worry about. This is ready. I think we're going to go ahead and serve this up. So just go ahead and dig in. Make sure you get a good amount of vegetables in there. Get your broth in there. And there you have it. What I like to do a lot of times is just go ahead and add a little bit of nutritional yeast to the soup. Nutritional yeast is the little trick that gives the soup or anything that you add it to a little bit of a cheesiness. A lot of times in Italy, this soup is actually served with a sprinkling of Parmesan and some olive oil over it. But you can achieve exactly the same results with just a little bit of nutritional yeast, maybe a little bit of flaxseed oil or olive oil over the top, and then just go ahead and enjoy the soup.